Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to the EduSat Network. Our topic of discussion today is Federalism, Center-State Relations and Democracy in India. And for this discussion and lecture, we have thus in our studio our subject expert Dr. Sushila Kaushik, retired Professor of Political Science, University of Delhi. Dr. Kaushik has taught for more than 4 decades, and with this brief introduction, I welcome ma'am to our studio and also request her to begin our today's lecture. Thank you for coming, ma'am.
In our continued series of lectures on Indian politics and Indian constitution, today we will take up the issue of federalism as a very basic and important aspect of our political system, political processes and the center-state relations in this country. By federalism, what I am going to talk about it is not so much the constitutional implications alone, but also its implications for the political process in our country, which means essentially the democratic processes of our country. So, that is why the title talks in terms of federalism and democracy in India, not just federalism either in its economic or political aspects alone. So, taking this, by federalism we must have a little bit of clarity about what is federalism. We do use the word federalism in a very loose context in English language, in the sense of anything which is distributed around, which is not decentralized, we call it federal. So, politics itself is federal. But when we do federalism in the constitutional sense, then it means that in that particular, in every country or in that country, we have 2 levels of government. One set of government which is right on the top, a national government, a central government which looks after the entire country, and then the country is divided into various portions called either the states or republics or any other word, where it has once again a government for that particular state or for a particular republic. So, we have 2 sets of government, parallel governments, one in the center and one in the states. The type of relationship between this center and the states is what we call the federal relationship. It could be different in different parts of the world, because we have almost every country in the world which is a federal country, with one important exception that in the world, namely the United Kingdom or Britain. Even though Britain has 4 units which are very clear-cut units like Ireland, Scotland and England and all that, still Britain is a unitary form of government, just having one government at the top in London and the rest of them really forming part of that government. There are some countries in Europe also which do not have a federal setup, but by and large most of the big countries in the world, big sized countries like United States, Australia or Russia, Soviet Union, used to have, Canada, have a federal type of government where you are one in the center and in the states or presidencies or republics as it used to be called in the Soviet Union before. So, this is the relationship which we deal with. Now, this sort of a federalism in turn also has certain implication for democracy. It means that the powers of the country, the functions of the country, the functions of the government, the problems of the government, the decision making of the government, the process of deciding this, all this really in turn is not concentrated only on the top as it is on the unitary government, but instead distributed and decentralized among the various states or units of this particular country. So, by itself federalism as a form of government is a sort of a democratic distribution, a democratic form of government. That is why in countries which are big in size, big in population or which has a pluralistic cultural sort of diversities, prefer to have a federal setup rather than what we call a unitary setup. So, that is where in forming federation there are certain rationale. I can particularly explain this in the context of both United States and India, the 2 top ranking federal countries in the world for us. Namely, in the case of United States, the way the United States was formed was something like where 13 units came together, have arrived at an understanding, formed a confederation, that is a loose federation, and then joined up to govern themselves together. Then one by one various other states which were existing in the neighborhood, they all joined it up. So, finally, we have 48 such states joining up together and forming the United States government as such. So, starting with a loose confederation, a loose form of a federation with only certain amount of departments being given away, but the rest being controlled by themselves, that is a confederation. They then arrived at a federation which is a little more solid, organized setup. Then they had a constitution framed in 1773, which is called the US Constitution, the American Constitution. As history shows us, there was a lot of discussion in the United States in forming the federation, lots of doubts, lots of clarifications needed, and finally they arrived at, after long discussions, to what you call presently the American Federation or American Constitution setup. These are in the form of what you call a document, set of documents called Federalist Papers. Very big luminaries, founding fathers of American Constitution are members of the Assembly, Constituent Assembly, their discussions are brought in together in the form of what you call the Federalist Papers. They remain as very big document, not merely for themselves, but even for countries like us who have adopted the federal model, because lots of doubts, clarifications and issues have come up in the course of their discussions. So, benefiting from that model and also believing that in India this is a better model, we also adopted the Federalist model in India in 1950 when we formulated our own constitution. But we had our own certain historical factors also in adopting this, and the other factors we will see it presently, why we adopted the Federalist form of government, federal form of government. These factors are something like the democratic arguments. As I said, normally by and large in a huge country like India, if we have a unitary form of government and not have a federal form of government, we have the more and more concentration of powers and functions in the hands of one government on the top. This is definitely in course of time will not be democratic. This is the real fear the United States also had in the Federalist Papers, why many people argued for federalism and not for confederation or not for a unitary government. We also believed in India being what it is and has having a different types of historical developments or evolution over a period of time, the best would be to have a federal form of government in which the various units will adopt their own patterns of development. So, this is considered as a highly democratic argument, because then each one will preserve what their own historical rights have been. The second important factor we have is the historical factor. The historical factors could be of two varieties. One is we have had a history in India which is very varied. The various parts of India, like the deep south or deep northeast or the north, have had very different types of historical evolution. Very many types of invasion has taken place in northern portion of India, so they have different type of influences. The south has been quite insulated from these invasions, so they have adopted very different types of cultural factors, plus the dynasties which were there in the south very different and isolated, insulated from the North Indian influences. The east has been very different. So, these historical developments and historical patterns need to be preserved, because they have given us a lot of cultural, political values as such. And with the result, the cultural variety also has been extremely variegated in India. If you have a unitary form of government, where you impose the decisions right from the top on a uniform way to entire India, then many of these cultural inheritances, cultural values may die down in course of time or may be resisted even from various parts of India. So, in order to preserve our pluralism, particularly in the northeast where the culture is quite different, where the inheritances have been extremely valuable, where we have a lot of anthropological, ethnic and tribal inheritances, it is much better to have some states of their own government and their policies, which in turn would be able to preserve these differences and nourish them in the course of time. So, we very consciously adopted a federal structure where each one of these units can formulate their own state, their own policies, their own government, and above all a language issue. India has had any number of languages when we became independent in 1947, but we really crystallized it into 14 major languages, and now it has been expanded into some more numbers that joined in. So, if we have these major languages as the language of government in various parts of India, that will bring the people closer to the government, that will be much more democratic, where the people can exercise their citizenship much better than if we impose one language, whether it is English or some other language from above. So, in 1950, we once again thought the mother tongue is a very important factor. By little later, by 1956-57, we even reorganized our states on the basis of the mother tongue, on the basis of the 15 officially agreed languages of this country, namely the scheduled languages in our constitution. So that 15 different states or more than 15 different states can adopt these 15 languages and thereby make the official language of that region, the governmental language of that region, the language between the government and the people, in the courts, in the administration, in the law books, to be the same as the mother tongue could be, because with India's level of literacy around at that particular point or even now, any other language will really debar our people from the rural and the not so educated sections from exercising their rights as a citizen as such. So, our cultural practices, our historical practices, our pluralistic languages, our composition of various types of caste, ethnicity and tribes in various parts of India, these are differences. At the same time, they are also our valued legacies. So, they need to be preserved, for which the government of the day should be able to be sympathetic, understanding as well as protecting them. This should be possible if we have a federalism and not have just one government from the center at the national capital, which is New Delhi. We also believe, being the size so large, India is really 1/3 of United States and one of the biggest states in the country, in the world, 1/6 of the population, 1/6 of the size of the world is India's size as well as India's population size. We cannot really rule this country by ruling from above. One government at the center will not be able to reflect on it with the help of the local governments. It is not the size of England, where you can have one country with local units, you can run the country. It is a country which is much more huge, as in the case of Soviet Union or Brazil or United States. So, we should have so many administrative units in various parts of India, thereby the people and the government can be closely interacting. And we also believe, in general, a country is ruled best when it is ruled from below. A country is ruled best when it is in touch with the population. So, for which the federalism gives us a very good mechanism by which we can control, administer, monitor our development in the country, and thereby the people can feel closer to the government of the day. We also have another problem in our country, which we also have inherited because of the British rule, namely, every part of our country is not equally or uniformly developed. There are portions of India which are not under the British control, they are under various control of various principalities and all. So, the development was varied. There are portions of the country which saw industrial development, but portions of the country which never witnessed any industrial development, any cultural development, any educational development. With the result, when we became independent once again, we found there is a vast disparity in various portions of India. So, if once again we put them all together, then the developed portions will go on developing, the not so developed portions will remain as undeveloped. So, if you give a government which can understand the problems and the levels of development and the disparities, they will be able to develop better, with their needs being reflected better in their own government. So, this is why we believe that if you have federal government with a lot of governments looking into the various units, then you can give a special focus to the problems of various types. We also adopted federalism because we also had inherited it little bit from the British rule. In British, even though they did not do it with that in their mind, they introduced the provincial autonomy in 1935. When they had an act for provincial autonomy in 1935 and implemented it by 1937-38, we had different governments which had come up in different provinces of India, or what they call presidencies of the country. So we had a certain amount of federalism introduced even in 1935. So we knew what is federalism, though it was only in few states of India. So we extended it to the rest of India too when we became independent and had a constitution 1950 as such. So historically we were familiar with that, and we found our socio, cultural, economic, developmental and other types of factors for also compelling us to have this diversity of governance as a necessity in our country as such. So the result is we had adopted federalism, whereby we have so many states which came into being when we adopted the constitution in 1950. But then subsequently in 1956, when there was a movement to have languages as the basis for all the states, we had reorganized our states, and so it changed in its composition, borders of the states changed. So we had about 22 states which came up. Subsequently again we did it in the period of in 2002, and then at that particular point again we had 3 or 4 more states which were created: Uttarakhand, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand. All these states came up at that particular point by splitting some of the huge states which are already in existence, like Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, UP were all split into 2. Finally, recently we have had, that's in the last year, another state number added, namely Andhra Pradesh was split into 2, Andhra and Telangana. So with the result, presently we have 29 states in this country, plus there are about 4 or 5 small regions which for various reasons we call it as union territories, either because they are very small or they have some special consideration, like India, Delhi being a capital of India, or Chandigarh being a disputed land between Haryana and Punjab. We had created a special category called union territory in this country. They are not part of our federal setup, they are more administered areas by the center, which is called union territories. Pondicherry is one of them, and of late, of course, for political reasons again, both Pondicherry and Delhi have become what you call territories with a territorial assembly or an assembly as such, and not just a union administered territory as such. So we have now got about 3 different variations in our country. We have states, we have union territories, we also have national capital region or Pondicherry, which is a third variety. So we have various ways of governing our country, mainly born out of cultural and historical and administrative reasons as such. The relationship between the central government and these states, central government and the union territory, central government and these other territories like Delhi and Pondicherry is what we call the federal relationship in this country. What has been the federal relationship in our country? What is the present state in these federal relations? What are the positive and what are the critical aspects of our federal relation is what we will take up right now in our lecture. For a federal setup, because it is something which believes in what we call a division of powers. It is something which believes in dividing the governing powers or governing functions as well as governing duties and responsibilities between 2 sets of governments. It can create certain amount of confusion. There could be some clarification needed. So that is where almost every federal country in the world definitely has what you call a written constitution. In fact, the only country which does not have a written constitution in the world is UK, Great Britain, which is run on the basis of what they call customs and traditions and values. They do not have a written constitution, but all the other countries in the world have a written constitution, because a written constitution gives a guarantee. It is something which is there as a referral point. It is something which a judiciary can adopt. It is something to which we can refer back whenever we have a confusion. When there is a friction between the center and any particular state, we will refer back to the constitution. So, the constitution has to be very clear, written out, and if possible what you call rigid constitution. What in political science they call it a rigid constitution, which means changing the constitution or amending the constitution should be a little more difficult than just a whims and moods of a political party which runs the country as a whole. So, this is what we call rigid constitution, where the procedure of amending the constitution should be a little more devious, a little more difficult than the flexible constitution, where you can just change the constitution with the majority of votes in the parliament. So, if you have a ruling party which has more than a simple majority in the parliament, they can keep changing. So, that should not be allowed. So, a federal constitution is usually a written and a rigid constitution with very specific procedures for how to change the constitution. In our own constitution, the Indian constitution, we do have various procedures. There are certain parts of our constitution which are easily changeable with just a simple majority of the parliamentary members, which is a little more flexible. But there are provisions in our constitution, which portions in our constitutions which cannot be changed so easily. It not merely requires a majority of those who are present and voting, both in the Lok Sabha as well as in the Rajya Sabha, but it also sometimes requires the majority of the support of the assemblies of a majority of states in our country. So, unless majority of states approve this and they approve it by a majority of votes present and voting in their own assemblies, there are portions in our constitution which cannot be changed at all, which is a long process, difficult process, but it is also a safety valve, so that the constitution is not meddled with very easily, and also so that the states will get an involvement and anything cannot be done at their cost. So, there are a lot of portions in our constitution which requires this sort of a big majority to support them, like our Panchayat amendment. When we change the 72nd and 73rd amendment of our constitution, which is changing the whole structure of government in our country, we required this very difficult process to go through before we will do. There are territories in certain states which are being given away or exchanged, or that cannot be done unless you have the constitutional amendment as well as the states concerned giving their consent to it. So, these are issues which come up very often. Sometimes the states do put up a big difficult time, so we cannot do the amendment so easily, but there are times when states go along with us readily, then it is easier to change it. But anyway, the whole idea is the state should be involved in it, center cannot do it all of its own, and so the states have a participation and nothing can be done over the states, and that is the essence of federal relationship and federalism. We also require in a federal system a strong judiciary, mainly because again there can be a lot of constitutional friction, constitutional questions which may come up, disputes which may come up in the course of our political functioning. At that time, somebody should be there who is able to give us a final word on it, interpret the constitution in its letter as well as the spirit. So, unless you have a very strong judiciary and a strong Supreme Court on the top, which in turn interprets the constitution and then gives the clarification in a center state dispute or interstate disputes between two states, then we will not be happy and safely safeguarding our federalism. So, that is where a strong judiciary and independent judiciary becomes a must for us. Then there is this division of powers between the center and the states. Once again, the very first constitution itself gave us this division of powers. What it did was, it divided the country's powers and functions and administrative responsibilities into three different lists: the central list, the state list and the concurrent list. There are spheres which only the center can act upon. The states have no role in it, like our defense, like our minting, making the currency, foreign policy. These are issues on which the states have no role at all. It is for the entire country, so it is atomic energy. These are things on which the center completely has monopoly of power and authority and functions. There are in the same way certain areas where the states really are responsible, particularly developmental functions like education, health. These are all the issues which normally belong to the state list. So, the local government is another one, or finance, or collecting taxes, especially the indirect taxes, what is like when we used to have sales tax. These are things which normally belong to the states. So, the constitution adopted these two. In course of time, they felt the need. On certain matters, both the center and the state have to act together, like trade with foreign countries. The center and the state both will have to act together, because trade involves the states, their economy. And so also we found very soon education, health and other issues cannot be totally left only to the states, because the states then do not have the means to do it. A lot of schemes have to be passed, and they may have to be passed by the central government, because they involve a lot of money. Uniform patterns have to be adopted. For instance, our CBSE, the central 12 class 2 12 state, these cannot be totally left to the states. It has to be also on the uniform pattern, because children migrate, parents migrate, they have to be going from school to school in various parts of India. So, we began bringing in education, health and other things into the concurrent list. So, in the course of the past few years, the concurrent list has emerged a lot. While we are not in any way infringing on the central list or the state list, the tendency is to add to the concurrent list a lot more, so that the center begins having a role in it. If it has a role, it has a responsibility. If it has a responsibility, then it has the finance to give it. So, as of now, we have, when the constitution started, under the 7th schedule of the constitution, we had 97 items in the union list, 66 items in the state list and 47 items in the concurrent list. In the concurrent list, if both center and the state makes a policy, sometimes if it conflicts, then it was adopted by the constitution that whatever was made by the central government would prevail, because it is for the entire country. We have now increased it much more, and we are still thinking of increasing a little more, so that the center can have the responsibility for the entire country, and the states also can get in a way a certain amount of aid from the center if it is part of the concurrent list. Otherwise, it will be totally left to the responsibility of the states. Some of our states are still very developed, some of our states are still quite weak economically, and so they find that they cannot fulfill all the requirement if it is totally left to them. So, with the result, we have an expansion of the concurrent list in recent times, and presently meeting is going on. A committee has been formed with Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister as the chair, where they are trying to figure out how many schemes should be passed on to the states, how many schemes should be only with the center. This is going on still. More than 20 schemes are being passed on to the states, and which means then the money which is attached to those schemes also should be passed on to the states. This is a financial implication. There is also a feeling that all the schemes need not go to all the states. Instead, the states should discuss and find out which are the schemes which are more useful to them, so they can opt out of them. So that those which have no relevance for them, they do not have to bring, because the states are very different in India. What is required in UP may not be required in Kerala. What is required in the northeastern states may not be required in Maharashtra. So, each state should be able to decide on its own which are the schemes they want to take up for themselves. So, some of the health schemes may not be required in Kerala. They have a good average health in many of the cases, maternal mortality or child mortality or something like this. So, they may prefer some other scheme for themselves. So, this is where they are arguing for more and more decentralization in decision making as to what schemes the states would like to have. Then we have between the center and states the most important aspect, the financial distribution. The country is one, people are one, they are the members of India and they are also the members of the states. So, from them we have most of the taxation done. There are indirect taxation, there is a direct taxation, somewhere where the government itself, the central government itself takes the money 100%, somewhere the portion of that money is collected by the center and given to the states. So, there is a financial distribution. There are some taxes which the states themselves impose on the population. So, that income goes to the states completely. So, again we have three different types of taxation revenue collection procedures in our thing, but then they should be organized and stocked properly and not left in a very anarchic fashion. So, we have the financial distribution, we have what you call an organized agency called a finance commission, which is mentioned by the constitution itself, which will be constituted every 5 years, and the finance commission in turn discusses it and then gives the procedures and then decides about which taxes should go to the center, which taxes should go to the states, and how the money which is collected by the center, what way is it distributed, how much of it goes to the states, how much of it goes to the center, on what basis is the distribution taking place, on the basis of population, on the basis of economic indicators like developmental indicators. These are the various issues which the finance commission usually discusses and then gives in its report. Normally this report is mandatory. Once the finance commission gives it, it is then all over adopted by the central government and then passed on to the states as per the finance commission's recommendation, because it is a constitutionally appointed commission as such. The president appoints this finance commission as such. So, see, these are some of the procedures which we have taken care of in our constitution, so that our federalism functions well. We also have something like a National Developmental Council. It is not part of the constitution, but then it has come up in the course of last so many years, that whenever we have any plans adopted or big policies which are being adopted for entire India, like the education policy or health policy or something, then the National Developmental Council is convened by the central government. That has all the state chief ministers and concerned ministers as its members. They come and discuss together these national policies and then give their views as to whether they want it for the states and what is the, how will it apply to their states. It is not a constitutionally constituted committee or council, but it is something which politically accepted in our country and is expected to be convened whenever we adopt any major policies, developmental policy in our country, which is called the National Developmental Council as such. We also have then the Indian and American practices, because we follow American practices, or either to follow or to not to follow. Quite a bit of model of American practices take place. While India is a parliamentary form of government, United States is a presidential form of government. So, also there are many countries which adopt this presidential form of government combined with federalism. We have a parliamentary form of government combined with federalism. With the result, our federal procedures and formulations quite a bit has to follow the parliamentary method, parliamentary form of government, their processes. So, we not merely have a parliamentary form of government at the center, we have a parliamentary form of government at the states too. So, this is bringing in a lot of differences between the American practice and our practice, even though we both have the same word called governor as the head of the state in our various states of India. The one thing we have where we are different from United States is, America is more federal than us is, the US has two types of citizenship. The population is part of US, they are American citizens, but they are also citizens of their own states, so that they have to follow the rules and regulations made by their own state. The American states also have their own flag. They have the central national flag, but they all, as we call, stars and stripes, but they also have their own state flag in the independent states. This is something which is now becoming a little controversial and in India, and we are all worried about it. Namely, no state in India has its own special flag. They do not have a national anthem separately, but sometimes we find some states adopt in their own language something what they call the state thematic song, which they sing whenever they have an official function in the states. But this is not a universal practice in our country. But some states like Jammu and Kashmir is now asking for a separate flag, which they believe they are been given one. This is a controversial issue which is coming up, but in general in India, the states do not have a separate flag or separate citizenship. They are all part of the Indian citizenship and use only one national flag, tricolor, as the flag for all occasions in all the states of India as such. So also when it comes to the powers of the governor. Since we have a parliamentary form of government in our states, the governor is more as what you call de jure head of the state, but the de facto head of the state is always a chief minister and the cabinet and the council of ministers, just as we have it in the center. So there is a head of the state and there is a head of the government. The chief ministers become the head of the government. And the governors run the states with the aid and advice of the council of ministers, just as in the center the president runs the state with the aid and advice of the council of ministers or the cabinet headed by a prime minister. So more or less we have adopted the same way. So very often our governors become nominal heads of the states, coming in actively only if there is a controversy or special occasion or something like equal number of members in the state assembly, so choosing the chief minister. Now, this sort of occasions only the governor gets into a real role, otherwise our governors are more as a nominal head of the state governments. This is not like United States, where like the President of United States, the governors in the states are also the head of the state, head of the government and their real power, and they are the ones who rule the state with the help of what they call a cabinet or set of secretaries as such. The second thing about this is very often we get into some controversies. Very many governors begin reinterpreting their roles and sometimes play a very active role, especially when in Indian states there is a controversy or a political situation or a political crisis where somebody has to intervene, then it is the governor who intervenes. Over a period of time, the governor is supposed to be only the head of the state, but often it has ended up as the governor is the agent of the center, because the process of choosing a governor in India is not by election, it is by nomination by the center, whereas in the United States the governor is elected every 4 years like the president. But here the governor is nominated and appointed by the central government. So, the ruling party in the center often gets a lot of scope to appoint the type of persons whom they want. In the earlier years, definitely our founding fathers and many others gave a tremendous status to the position of a governor, and they appointed really those who are wise, who are experienced, who were otherwise also well known intellectuals, who can use their powers, discretionary powers, very wisely, dispassionately. But this is not so much these days. We find subsequently as we went along, the governors became objects of political patronage. The party which is in the center, whichever is the party in the center, began appointing people whom they wanted to reward, or retired politicians or even defeated politicians in the elections as the governors. We also have many army generals and retired generals appointed as governors. We have bureaucrats appointed as governors. We have judges now who is being appointed as governors, and even the Chief Justice of India has been appointed as a governor of late. So, we have no rule and regulation about it. There is no discretion given for this. It is actually the central ruling party, which in a small form it is the Prime Minister and his cabinet, who really can choose anyone as the governor. The result is the job of the governor, the office of the governor has become quite controversial. It has become a subject of controversy over the past 30 years, because many of them perhaps should not be occupying that post, if you say it that way. But more than that, many of them are viewed as agents of the center. So, especially because after 1967, many of the states in India have come to be ruled by political parties other than the one which has been ruling in the center. Lot of state governments are being now run by parties other than that is ruling in the center. For instance, today in the present context, there are only 6 states in India which is being ruled by the BJP. There are some more states which the BJP is ruling in coalition with, in alliance with parties, like in four states they are doing it. But in all the other states, the parties which are ruling in the states are not BJP, but some regional parties or by the Congress. The result is the relationship between the center and the states is tense, it's little more controversial, and those controversies, disputes are no longer being settled within the party forum as it used to be in the earlier years. If there is any difference, the party used to pick it up and deal with the situation. But now, because the parties are different and even opposition parties, these issues come up in the open, and to resolve them often the governor comes into the picture. So, we also in the course of time lost out on another good tradition we had, namely when a governor is appointed, the state chief minister is consulted. At least he or she should not have any objection to a particular person. We are even giving it up now. The center is appointing any person whom it chooses without even consulting the states or even informing them in advance, with the result very often the state governments are suspicious of the governor who is being appointed, and that creates a lot of ill will in the relationship between the governor and the chief ministers in the states, chief ministers or central prime minister or central government, or governors and the president of this country. So, we have, even though the governors operate under the president's discretion, they have to report, and the president keeps calling them by way of a governors meeting once in a year or twice in a year. We still have a lot of tense relationship coming up every now and then between them. One of the important tense relationship which comes up is in the form of what we call president's rule. Once again, in the United States, there is nothing called a president's rule. Once you are there for 4 years, you are there for 4 years, and the next election only can change you. But in this country, since elections are not for the governor, but only for the cabinet and the assemblies, we have often the relationship between the center and the state, when it gets some reason or if something happens in the states, if there is a law and order machinery failing or any other external threat or internal threat happening, a constitutional breakdown, or if no party gets a majority, or if there are too much of defection among the parties in the state assemblies, and so the ruling party loses its majority, many such occasions keep coming up. At that particular point, the center is tempted to resort to what we call the president's rule. Our constitution itself provides for it in article 356. But when the constitution provided for it, it was very clear about it. When there is an external threat, or when there is a financial emergency, or when there is a constitutional breakdown, then only the president's rule should have been introduced. That is a constitutional provision. But in actual form, we find at every small excuse, the president's rule had been imposed, and for 6 months the president's rule can be there. At the end of it, a new government can come in with a new election, or sometimes even the president's rule is extended. So, sometimes you have 3-4 times the president's rule has been extended every 6 months, with the result the democracy, the ruling by people in the states have often been endangered in the process. So, the president's rule and the article 356 has become very controversial in this country, and people have been opposing it, and resorting to it very frequently shows the center's supremacy over the states, and the states are kept in some sort of a suspense for a very long time, which is not at all good for a democratic practice in this country. Of late, of course, there is a very clear-cut recognition of this. So, in the past so many years, president's rule has not been resorted to, but other ways of resolving the crisis are being found out. so that such breakdowns will not occur. And there may be a suspended animation for a few months, but then president's rule is not imposed for too long a period unnecessarily, because this is a undemocratic form which we should not resort to except in critical times, which is being understood now increasingly. We then also have the appointment, the election, nomination, qualification of governors, as we talked about, which has bred a lot of even corruption and reward for pliability. It's no longer a political ethics not to mention this, because quite a few of our governors have been dragged into the court on some scam or other. Even if they are not dragged into the court and we don't come to know about it, a bit of corruption has been associated with quite a few of our governors, which shows in a way the decline of politics in our country, the decline of moral politics in our country, which is not expected, because a governor has to be above board. Governor in turn has to be able to check the chief ministers and others. He should be an authority who should be stopping this corruption or corrupt practices. To expect the governor himself to get involved in it or get involved in unnecessary type of interference and intervention in politics is something which is not called for. So, that is where a dilution of governors' roles, and along with that a dilution in the status of governor has come up. The status of the governor gets diluted, then the role also gets diluted. So, from the very eminent position which the governors should occupy, somewhat reflecting the similarly eminent position which the president should occupy in this country, there are a lot of stories and rumors which has begun evolving around these offices, which are not elected offices. So, this is all the more undemocratic for us. These differences between the party system in the center and the states is another one of the issues which have come up. Even though the constitution has very clearly pointed out the division of powers between the center and the state, still very often there is a feeling that the center is adopting or waging a war against a particular state in case it is by another party, particularly a political discrimination, lack of help for that particular state, sending the military in at the drop of a hat, and many other types of discrimination which comes up very often. Charges of it comes up very often between the center and the states. We even had a recent elections where the propaganda was done by saying that if they have the same party in power both in the center and the states, it will be easier for them to govern and then easier for them to get a developmental benefit. Meaning thereby that if another party comes to power at the state level, then the center will not extend the same type of a cordial relationship or the help or the financial and other developmental schemes to that particular state, because they are ruled by another party. This is not at all a democratic way of doing things. It definitely goes against the federal spirit of our constitution and our political process, because irrespective of which party rules in the center, which party rules in the state, we should be able to follow the constitution in its spirit, and every state government, whichever party it is constituted, the government should get the necessary help and have the cordial relationship with the center. So, the center state relationship is something which is beyond politics and beyond the elections. It is one thing to fight the elections and do the campaigning, but it is something else once the election is over. The current controversy between Delhi state and the center is something which really reflects on the constitution and the federal relations and this particular political parties and processes which is going on in India, where the governor, the chief minister, central government, state government, everybody has been dragged into the daily debates and very murky type of issues, which is not really healthy for the Indian Federation. So, we do have the political parties playing a very important role in our federal relationship, and this in turn is going beyond the elections into daily administration of the political parties, which is not at all healthy for this country at all. So, we have to restore this back again Otherwise, with about 18 to 20 political parties or other than the center ruling in various parts of India, the center-state relationship, especially when it comes to grants, grants in aid or flood relief, damage control, when you have these natural disasters which is coming up quite a lot in the various states in this country, those are the things which concern the population. Immediately we have a lot of delay taking place, lot of money not coming in, or a lot of charges which is coming up, which is very, very unwholesome for a democracy in our country. So, we have this sort of issues which are now coming up in our country by way of center-state relationship. Where sometimes it is very cordial, sometimes it is not so cordial, sometimes it involves issues which is not merely just finance and territory and other things, but even involves territory, border, foreign policy, defense. Even there we have sometimes the problems, especially with the border states in India. With terrorism looming large in our country, many of these border states which are porous borders, long borders, land borders, sea borders with the neighboring countries, some of which are not too cordial to us, also with other countries using them to come into our country, we have issues between center and states becoming little more difficult even for the center, because defense and foreign policy is something which the center has to deal with, not the states. Foreign trade is something which of course both center and states can get involved, even though it is center's domain, but the states can go and lobby for themselves, pointing out what is good in our particular states, but ultimately the trade relationship is part of the central's domain, but the states can get involved with them. So, we also have problems with interstate issues. Water, power, electricity and water especially has become a very thorny issue between the states. Even border sometimes becomes a thorny issue in our states. So, you have every now and then the Karnataka, Tamil Nadu issue come up on Kaveri, Tamil Nadu and Kerala issue coming up on the Mullaperiyar Dam or an Ambattur Dam between Maharashtra and Karnataka. So, we have a lot of issues which keep coming up which needs to be settled. So, what we should have is what is called a cooperative federalism. In fact, our constitution envisages a cooperative federalism, not a competitive federalism, not this tense federalism. So, we in fact in the early years, Morris Jones, when he wrote about our political practices, he called it as a cooperative federalism. Of late, our leaders have begun talking in terms of a competitive federalism, but what they mean is a positive competition to come up better than the others. So, ultimately the citizens will develop better, but sometimes this competitive federalism becomes very quarrelsome federalism. So, what we have very often is a very quarrelsome federalism rather than either competitive in the nice sense of the word or definitely not a cooperative federalism. So, we also have these foreign issues coming up. Some states in India, because of their backwardness, do not get any foreign aid or foreign agencies wanting to invest in them. Some states in India are very easy for them because the better administration, better development, better roads, better power facilities, better leadership, better efficiency. So, a lot of MNCs would like to settle there. This brings a disparity. So, development and equal development, so the center needs to come in and take these MNCs, their investments into those states which need the most for their own development. The center has to play a positive role there. Often the center does not seem to do it because the state governments also are with the center or not having a very good relationship in those factors. So, we do find we have a lot of issues on federalism, but we are a very strong federal country still, and we over a period of time the political pundits have described Indian federalism not in the same term as United States or any other federalism in the world, but as a part of what we call a sui generis, which is a unique model. It means just a unique model, a model where it is quasi federal, not federal, not unitary, but quasi federal. It is federal in form, but unitary in spirit, which is also not being very fair, because over a period of time we are making an attempt to make it this thing, federal one. Over a period of time we have had a lot of commissions and reports that come up, Rajamanna report, or recently Sarkaria report, Sarkaria commission appointed by the central government, so that this interstate as well as center state relationship could be studied and better recommendations could be given to us. So, we have over a period some of these tendencies to centralize, like we have tendencies to sort of find out why these the lack of development is one important reason for the centralizing tendency. So, that invites the attention and the grant and the money from the center. So, that makes it a little more tendency to centralize. The balanced development is lacking, welfare schemes are lacking, concurrent list gets expanded more than the state list. Movements like terrorism, communalism, separatism, regionalism, and very many separatist type of movements coming up invites the attention of the center along with the armed forces. So, we are sending the armed forces into various parts of India like the entire northeast or Jammu and Kashmir. With the result, the state police feels is abridged, and they feel that the center is commanding over them through the army. And the threats from the borders, especially from Pakistan this side, China that side, and also some of these people moving in, terrorist groups moving in from Bangladesh or Myanmar, Thailand, those are issues which keep coming up for the border states. So, we increase our paramilitary forces there. To that extent, the people's autonomy, people's rights get abridged. So, the lack of democracy comes up in the border states of India, that leads to frustration, anti-India movements, and lots of grievances develop in the northeastern states of India, where some of them began saying you Indians sort of stuff. These are our challenges in front of us, in front of federalism, in front of democracy in India. So, a true federalism has to be worked out, tolerated, understood in the spirit as well as in the letter in which it is. Otherwise, India can become split into various. Federalism is a guarantee against our splitting into various parts. So, Balkan states should not take place here. We will talk about it more in other topics when we come up, wherever it is relevant. Thank you. Thanks, Iswat.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this very interesting and in-depth lecture. And friends, as ma'am promised, she shall be back with us with the other topics to talk about. So, friends, with this we take your leave. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thanks.
And thank you, friends, for watching. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thanks.